Every town and city is made up like a mechanism of cogs, each person helping in the movement of keeping it going and keeping it moving forward. And I think it's easy to forget that in our busy lives. But one of the things that I like to do is to walk through the cemeteries, read the headstones and the inscriptions, and learn about some of the people that came before us. Now today we are in Leeds and we're going to be visiting 3 of its historic cemeteries. Now one of the things I've learned when I've been researching this video is that they all, even though their cemeteries are separated by miles, they've all got stories in a way that link with one another. So we're going to start off first with Leeds General, which some of you might know if you are local as Woodhouse Cemetery on St George's Field near the university campus. Leeds, a city in the north of England built on industry, ambition and the lives of those who came before us. By the 19th century, it had become an industrial force to be reckoned with, a city often described as a northern powerhouse, driven by coal, innovation and the vast mills that dominated its skyline. From Beeston Hill in 1816, artists painted a city thick with smoke and fumes. And by 1840 the air was described as a dark haze of soot hanging heavy over the streets below. And it was beneath that sky that thousands of lives were lived, people who came here in search of work, of opportunity, of something better. But as the city grew, so too did the dead. Churchyards became overcrowded, graves layered upon graves, until space itself became a luxury. And in a place shaped so heavily by class, even in death not everyone was treated the same. Today we'll see how some were remembered with towering monuments, while others were laid to rest in silence, their names fading into the earth. Because these aren't the names you'll always find in textbooks, but they are the people who built this city. And this is the Leeds we're going to imagine, as we step back in time to listen to the long forgotten stories of those who came before us. Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Claire, this is the Wanderlust Way. Now first off, let me say a massive thank you to everybody that supports this channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, becoming members, sending super thanks, because everything you're doing is helping the channel to grow. It's allowing me to carry on with these journeys and keep sharing the stories that I find with you. So today, as you know, we are in Leeds, West Yorkshire, which in its heyday was a big player in the textiles industry. So the city did boom at certain points, and that meant lots more people in the city and of course lots more deaths. The cemeteries became, or the churchyards became overcrowded. They had to build more cemeteries and stuff. So there's loads and loads of history here, and I'm going to be walking through 3 of them today with you. Now some of the people in this story, they might not necessarily be famous as you might think in a way, but their stories are really, really important, and they help us understand some of the events that have gone on in the city. Some of these events are absolutely tragic as well, so you might need your tissues at some point. And I'm going to save this one for the last for you as a little bit of a treat, but we're also going to hopefully be visiting one of the graves. It's one of the most famous graves in Yorkshire, and when this grave was erected, people travelled miles to come and visit it. It was that popular that the police had to watch over it, and they had to get extra trams on and everything like this. I believe they were selling postcards for this grave for people to visit. So I've never seen it before. I'm going to hopefully go and see it today, and I'm going to share that with you as well. So that's one worth waiting until the end for. So anyway, everybody, that's enough waffle. Let's wander. Leeds General Cemetery opened in 1835, but its story begins a couple of years earlier in 1833, when the Leeds General Cemetery Company was formed. A committee was established to find a suitable site, and they chose this land here, known as St George's Field near Woodhouse Moor. The first recorded burial took place on the 23rd of July 1835, and from that point on this became one of the city's most important burial grounds. Not tied to any one church or denomination, but open to all. And over the years, thousands were laid to rest here. The cemetery remained in use until 1969. Now, when I started looking into this place a little bit more closely, I found something that really stood out, because the burial registers are actually available online. You can have a look at them yourself, you can check them out, you can read them through. And they cover tens of thousands of people buried here between 1835 and the late 20th century. That's over 97,000 entries in total. And when you begin to explore them, patterns start to emerge. So after the stillbirths and the deaths recorded as unknown, one cause appears again and again and again. Bronchitis. Thousands of people. And I'm no expert, but it doesn't take much to start connecting the dots, because this was a city shaped by industry. Coal smoke filling the air, factories running day and night, workers inhaling dust and pollutants as part of everyday life. A dense urban environment where the air itself could become a hazard. And suddenly, those numbers begin to tell a story, not just of death, but of how people lived, of the conditions they endured and the cost that came with that. But this is something we will come back to again shortly, because as we continue this wander, the contrast becomes even more visible at other cemeteries too. And just beyond here, there is another story waiting, one captured not in stone but in paint. Because in 1836, just a year after this cemetery opened, a boy was born here in Leeds who would go on to paint the city exactly as it was. John Atkinson Grimshaw. Now his work gives us a glimpse into this world, the warehouses, the smoke, the river, traffic, a city alive with industry and overshadowed by it. On the side of the chapel, they've got a blue plaque, which has been put together, looks like, by the Leeds Philosophical and Literary Society. And this says, near this place is buried John Atkinson Grimshaw, 1836 to 1893, celebrated painter of city and harbour scenes in moonlight. Now, I'll pop some photographs if you've not seen any of his work. I'll pop some photographs over the screen now, because if you haven't seen any of his work, it's absolutely beautiful, really moody, a little bit gothic. You've got landscape scenes, but it's mixtures of the light and things like that. I think one of my favourite ones is one that he did of Edinburgh? Yeah, I think it was Edinburgh. So yeah, I'll post some of those on. But yeah, we've not found the grave yet. If we do, then I'll let you know. But they've got a plaque here that said he's around here somewhere. Now obviously a lot of the graves are no longer here, so it might be that his actual headstone's not here anymore. John Atkinson Grimshaw, born here in Leeds in 1836 in a back-to-back house on Park Street. In his early 20s he was working as a clerk for the Great Northern Railway, but at just 24 years old he made the decision to leave it all behind and pursue life as a painter. One of his favourite subjects was Scarborough, capturing its streets and seafront in that same atmospheric style. And when you stand here knowing that, it makes you realise just how closely his life was tied to the places, the people and the world we are walking through today. Have you ever come across any of his work, or maybe you've even got a piece of it at home? Let me know in the comments. So just below the plaque for John Atkinson Grimshaw, you can find this next plaque, which it says, "In these grounds lies buried Private Charles Hull, 21st Lancers." Now, he is the Victoria Cross owner, and he actually was born in Harrogate, and he was part of the 21st Lancers. He was originally a postman in Harrogate, and then he went and joined them, and he won a Victoria Cross. I'll tell you a little bit about the story. Charles Hull, awarded the Victoria Cross in 1915 at just 25 years old. During action on the northwest frontier of British India, an officer's horse had been shot, leaving him exposed and at the mercy of advancing tribesmen. Hull rode straight into danger, pulled the officer up behind him and carried him to safety at immense risk to his own life. It was an act of extraordinary bravery, one that would earn him the highest military honour. And after the war he returned home, joining Leeds Constabulary and later rising to the rank of sergeant. And it's here, in Leeds General Cemetery, that he was laid to rest. But he wasn't the only one remembered here for acts of bravery. So just after you've come into the cemetery lodge entrance, you can find the Fireman's Memorial. Now, when I first was researching about this cemetery, this is the story that brought tears to my eyes. And get the tissues ready, guys, because this is a sad one. Now, it's the Fireman's Memorial. I'll read what it says. It says, "Always ready, in memory of James Potter Schofield." He was nicknamed Jim, by the way. He fell at his post, Leeds Joint Station Fire, January the 13th, 1892, aged 43. R.W. Horney Fireman died February the 8th, 1896, aged 28 years. Joseph Ellis died March the 30th, 1897, aged 31 years. And Herbert Story, killed in the execution of his duty, February 24th, 1909, aged 32 years. Now, there's the memorial, I believe, was first put up for Jim Schofield, and extra names have been added that have lost their lives in the line of duty. Now, Jim's is a story that took place in what was described as one of the worst fires, or the greatest fires, I think the newspapers called it, in the history of Leeds, and it happened underneath the railway station. Now, I won't tell you too much about his story just yet, because there is a little bit of a link to this memorial to the next cemetery that we're going to be visiting, which is at Beckett Street. That's where Jim, or James, has actually been buried. So we're going to try and have a look for that shortly, and then I'll tell you the full story. But yeah, get your tissues ready for this one, guys, because it is a sad one. I've just spotted this one, and it's got nothing to do with the stories that I'm telling you today, but it's just a classic example of how you can read so much into the headstones. So we've got "in loving memory of Lancelot, second son of W.W. and M. Weatherburn." Now, all the way down the bottom, we've got Wilson, eldest son of the above, born the August the 27th, 1858, died at Wellington, New Zealand, February 21st, 1885. And obviously we're in Leeds. He's died in New Zealand, so does that mean he's interred here? And if so, they must have had to transport him all the way from New Zealand in 1885. There's a story there. I imagine a very sad story, but a story there. Now again, I've not done any research on this chap, but John Garson, wine and spirit merchant of the town. And we've got next to him David Hepworth, innkeeper, Holbeck. Now, if my memory serves me right, in Holbeck there are a lot of innkeepers in the cemetery in Holbeck. Lots of people related to sort of the brewery trade and things like that. So, and then again, next to him we've got William Reinhardt of this town, chemist, who died 19th of February. So these people all played a massive role in their society. Chemists, innkeepers, wine and spirit merchants. I've managed to find the grave of Pablo Fanque, or I think some people say Fanque, but I think it's Fanque. Anyway, he was such an important figure in the Victorian times, in the golden age of the circus, because he was the very first black circus owner. Pablo Fanque, the first recorded black circus owner in Britain, whose performances captivated audience for more than 30 years during what many would call the golden age of the circus. He was born William Darby and is thought to have been orphaned at a young age. By just 11 years old, he had been apprenticed into the circus, making his first appearance in Norwich in 1821 as young Darby. From there, he built a life in performance, mastering equestrian acts, rope walking, and eventually taking on the name we remember today, Pablo Fanque. His reputation grew, with reports of him performing before Queen Victoria and touring across England, Scotland and Ireland, though much of his work remained here in the north. But what stands out, it's not just the spectacle, but the man himself. Because beyond the performances, Fanque was known for his generosity, supporting families in times of illness, death and hardship. In a world where many struggled, that kind of kindness mattered. And in 1846, he was presented with a written testimonial, praising not just his success, but his character, and it ended with these words: "And when the hoary hand of age should cease to wave over your head at a good old age, may you sink into the grave regretted, and your name and acts of benevolence be remembered by future generations." Quite a sad story, because First of all, his wife Susanna is buried here. Now, Susanna actually died in an accident at one of the circus performances. Because behind the success there was tragedy. Pablo married Susanna Marlowe and together they had 2 sons. And in 1848, here in Leeds, everything changed. During a performance at the amphitheatre on King Charles Croft, a packed gallery collapsed, sending hundreds crashing down. Around 600 people were caught in that fall, but Susanna was the only one who did not survive. Heavy timber struck her at the back of the head, and despite attempts to get help, she was pronounced dead soon after. And it was here that Pablo Fanque laid his wife to rest. One of the reasons, so he was famous in the Victorian times, but he was famous again because of the Beatles, because of a song that the Beatles wrote, that John Lennon wrote, that actually was because of him. In the 1960s, Pablo Fanque found himself written into music history. The Beatles' song, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, was inspired almost entirely by a 19th century circus poster advertising one of his shows. John Lennon had bought it in an antique shop, later saying that nearly every word in that song came directly from the poster. From performers flying through hoops to horses dancing the waltz, it was all there. A glimpse into the world of Fanque's circus preserved in music. The grave reads, "Sacred to the memory of Susanna Darby, aged 47 years. The beloved wife of William Darby, equestrian manager, professionally known as Pablo Fanque." Her death was occasioned by the falling of a portion of the circus erected in King Charles Court, Leeds, on Saturday the 18th day of March 1848. "To God's decree we mortals all must bend, thy will be done, our best and only friend. My soul by thy command is borne away to realms of light and never-ending day. Torn from this world and from my husband dear, pity my fate and drop a silent tear. Her bereaved and afflicted husband has caused this monument to be erected. Also Caroline Susanna, the infant daughter of William and Elizabeth Darby, who died January the 1st, 1859, aged 1 year and 4 months. Of such is the kingdom of heaven." So there is a story behind this, because William did go on and marry another woman just a few months after Susanna died. They went on to have 3 children, I believe. They had 2 boys and a girl. The girl died, and so he had her buried here with Susanna, the first wife, and then he got buried here when he died as well. In 1871, Pablo Fanque died of bronchitis, a cause we've already mentioned, echoing through this cemetery. And though he died in Stockport, it was here in Leeds that he was brought to rest. His funeral procession was a fitting tribute, a band leading the way, playing the Dead March, his favourite horse following behind, and mourners walking in his honour. A life lived in the spotlight, laid to rest among the people of the city that had shaped it. Now, I've just met one of the groundsmen. They've put this cord around today because apparently over here, in the really old bit over there, I'll go a little bit closer in a minute, the ground's actually sunk. There was a guy walking his dog the other day and there was just a massive hole where around one of the tombs. So obviously it was very, very dangerous. So he's explained that they've cornered all this off for safety reasons. It's been like this for about a month because they just don't want any more sort of holes in the middle of the ground, anybody falling in. However, some of the graves that were literally just over the thing over there, the Pablo Fanque one, he's allowed me to just jump over and quickly do that. But if you are wanting to come and visit and you're wanting to get up closer to the graves, right now you can't. This is the bit I was just telling you about. It does look like it's got some really old graves over there. I'd love to go and have a little bit of a rummage, but obviously that sinkhole that they've had to try and fill in means it's dangerous, and it just shows you how much work these old cemeteries take for the people that are trying to maintain the grounds. If you want to come and visit this cemetery for yourself, you can find it. It's amongst the university campus in Leeds. Now, this place obviously was originally parkland, I believe. Then it got turned into a cemetery, and then now it's almost like parkland again. They had to get rid of a lot of the memorials and the headstones, and they didn't remove any of the bodies. So all of this land that we see around us, all of this sort of parkland space, it looks very beautiful and green, and it is a recreational park space, but there are still bodies under here. This is still a memorial really to the people that lay beneath our feet, the people of Leeds that are still down here. So
in 1956, the University of Leeds acquired a majority share in the cemetery company, and not long after, legislation was passed that would allow for its transformation. Between 1968 and 1969, some of the memorials were removed. Some were taken into collections, others left in place, but many were simply covered over. And what had once been a cemetery became a public green space. A place where people walk, sit, pass through, maybe unaware of what lies beneath their feet. And it does make you wonder, how important are these places now? Should they remain as memorials to those who came before us? Should we remove the headstones? Or is progress for the living more important? Because not every cemetery met the same fate. And just a short distance from here, and a place we're visiting next, there is a place where people chose to fight, to make sure that it did not disappear.
So hopefully I can get down this street here.
Onto Beckett Street, then you will arrive at your destination.
we now found ourselves at Beckett Street Cemetery, and I'm going to just read you a little bit from here. So Beckett Street Cemetery, also known as the Leeds Burial Ground and Bermontoft Cemetery, is the second oldest municipal cemetery in the country. As the population of Leeds Township trebled during the period 1801 to 1851, disposal of the dead became a pressing issue with limited space in local churchyards. In 1842, Leeds Corporation was granted permission from Parliament to provide and operate cemeteries. Right, so this is what I will show you in a moment. In 1849, 1,600 victims of the cholera epidemic were buried in mass graves. Later, paupers from the nearby workhouse were buried in unmarked graves and inscription or Guinea graves. So we'll have a look at the Guinea graves shortly. There's also, hopefully we're going to find that fireman that I mentioned earlier from the Fireman's Memorial, and there's another lady that I'd like to find that was involved in a very tragic accident in the city as part of the war efforts. So we've got some hunting to do here. Well, this is lovely if you come this way. So I've just got to the main entrance, and there's a thing on the side where they've got cemetery trails. So I've only just seen that. That's going to be helpful to help find some people. Britain's second oldest municipal cemetery.
Beckett Street Cemetery, located in Bermontofts, Leeds, and therefore sometimes referred to as Bermontofts. It opened in 1845 as a 20-acre site and the first publicly funded cemetery in Leeds. Over the years, it became the final resting place for people of all walks of life, from local gentry and industrialists to tradesmen, families and community figures. By the 1970s, more than 180,000 people had been buried here, across over 27,000 graves. But like so many places of its kind, it began to fall into decline. Rising costs, vandalism and a lack of funding led to plans in 1984 to close the cemetery, clear the memorials and turn the land into grass. There were even proposals for the Leeds Supertram to take part of the land along its edge. But this time, people pushed back. In 1985, local residents packed into meetings determined to stop the cemetery from being lost. And from that, the Friends of Beckett Street Cemetery was formed, led by Sylvia Barnard, who worked to preserve not just the site, but the stories of those buried here. The plans were scrapped, and to this day the cemetery remains, cared for, protected, because here, people choose not to forget.
From the leaflet I've just picked up, there is a map which shows you where some of the graves are, so this should hopefully make things a little bit easier. But it also gives me some information as well about these lodges. So you'll see one behind me there. I'll show you the other one in a minute. And it says there are 2 lodges in the cemetery, originally occupied by cemetery staff. As in many Victorian cemeteries, the Church of England and dissenters, nonconformists, those who had broken away from the church, were kept apart even in death. This northern part of the cemetery where you are standing here was reserved for the nonconformists, the Methodists, the Baptists, etc., the Catholics, Jews and agnostics. You will see the South Lodge at the end of your walk, which we'll do in a second, in the consecrated Anglican section. This has now been sold and converted into apartments. That's just over here. Let's see. We're standing in a part of the cemetery now which actually is quite overwhelming because it highlights not only epidemic loss, cholera, things like that, but the sheer number of people that died in this city, that died in poverty because they couldn't afford a grave of their own. Now, what is round me, you'll see lots of graves that are almost like in symmetry. They're in lines. They were known as Guinea graves because if you couldn't afford to have your own grave, but you could afford a guinea, then you could be buried in one of these. And it's really sad because when you look at them now, being buried in one of these meant that you got a place in the plot. Now I believe, I've read different things, but some say they have 20 in a grave, some say up to 40. But if you paid your guinea, you'd get a place in one of these graves. You'd also get your name put on the stone. That's what you were paying for. And they would leave them open and they'd keep filling them up until the number was at its tops, and then they'd cover them over. And you can't imagine them, I don't know, just the amount of them here, it just shows you how many people just couldn't afford their own. So let's just have a little look at some of them. I mean, so for example, if you take this first one, you've got Anne E. Penrose, 77. You've got Edward Banks, 61. William Maple, 75. Isabella Butler, 53. Mary Slade, 63. James Keeble, 72. Frank Manning, 8. Mary Levitt, 6. And then there's more on the other side. So they have names on both sides of these graves because obviously the plots were so big. So then on this side you've got Charles Sowden, 53. William Mills, 79. Maria Brophy, aged 4. Edward Thackeray, aged 2. Thomas Spite, 14 months. Annie Spencer, 5 months. Mary Green, 51. Fanny Mann, 52. Harry Frobisher, 3 years old. Thomas Giles, 58. Dorothy Walker, 10 weeks old. And Ernest Bailey, 8 months old. So a real mix of people. These people wouldn't have known each other, unlikely anyway, and yet they're all buried together. And graves like this, yeah, they were very, very useful in times of epidemic, cholera, for example, but they were also in times of hardship. Now, what's what's interesting about this part of the story is that we are opposite what was once the workhouse. So some of these people will have lived and died and been buried in this area in a very small corner of Leeds, this corner. Just outside the cemetery gates behind me is what was once the workhouse. So you can see how the close proximity from there to here, and some people would have lived their lives from there to here. Now today it's the Thackeray Medical Museum. I do believe it's actually haunted. I've never been in myself, but if you've got any ghost stories about that place, then feel free to share them in the comments. But yeah, the workhouse, that was a important part of the history in this area. The sheer volume of these graves is very, very humbling. And they are just all over.
And while many here were buried in poverty, others lost their lives in the line of duty, because in Victorian Leeds, fire was a constant threat, and those who fought it did so at great personal risk.
We've managed to find it. Now, this was the one I really did want to find because this man is such a hero. There was thousands and thousands of people that came to his funeral service, and I'll tell you the full story in a minute, but let me just read you his inscription. In memory of James Potter Schofield, late of the Liverpool and London and Globe Fire Brigade, Leeds, who lost his life whilst on duty during a large fire at the Leeds Joint Stations, January 13th, 1892, aged 43 years. This stone was erected by his brothers and sisters. James's story is one of those that really chokes you up. It's a very human story. It's a story of sacrifice, and it just shows us how dangerous the conditions were for the firefighters of the Victorian era.
We saw the memorial to him earlier, but this is where James, or Jim, Potter Schofield is actually buried. He was a Leeds lad, born and bred, and worked as a firefighter with the Liverpool and Globe Insurance Brigade alongside his younger brother William. And on the 13th of January 1892, there was a huge fire here in Leeds beneath the joint railway station in the dark arches below. Now, those arches were used for storage, and one of the businesses down there was a soap manufacturer, Joseph Watson and Sons. They had thousands of tons of oils, fats, pitch and resin stored underneath the station. So you can imagine, once that fire took hold, it didn't take much for it to spread. Crews came in from all over, Leeds, Bradford, York, Derby, and the fire burned for around 20 hours. At one point during the operation, Jim took over from his brother on the hose, and just a few minutes later, the platform he was standing on gave way, and he fell into the fire below. His brother later said, "He took the jet from me and I never saw him again." His body wasn't recovered until the next day when the flames had been extinguished, and even then it had to be identified by what was left of him. Buttons from his tunic, a brass badge, an axe head, and the key to the engine house. I told you it was sad one, this one, guys, one for the tissues. Anyway, he was brought here to be buried with his family, and the city really did turn out for him. Around 20,000 people came to his funeral. His coffin was draped in the Union flag, carried with his brigade, with firefighters travelling from across the region to pay their respects. And at the end of all that, the choir from the Grand Theatre sang "Days and Moments Quickly Flying," which feels quite fitting, really. And it just shows the kind of life he lived and the kind of man he must have been. But he isn't the only one, because there are other stories here of bravery and of loss.
We've now found, tucked away in this corner, the grave of Elsie Martha Atkinson, a munitions worker at Barnbow, killed in an explosion the 5th of December 1916, aged 18 years old. Now, I read online, I think it was the Friends of Beckett Street Cemetery, they've organised for this new grave to be built, and hers, along with all the women that she worked with, theirs was I've only just heard about this story, they were called the Barnbow Canaries, and they worked in a munitions factory in Leeds, and of course there was a terrible accident.
Barnbow Munitions Factory was Britain's premier shell factory during the First World War, where a workforce made up of around 93% women were known as the Barnbow Lasses, or the Barnbow Canaries, named for the yellow staining of their skin caused by handling toxic TNT and cordite. Together they filled hundreds of thousands of tons of ammunition, working in conditions that were, as you can probably imagine, incredibly dangerous. And one of those workers was Elsie Martha Atkinson. She was just 18 years old, and on the night of Tuesday the 5th of December 1916, she came to work like she would have done any other night. It was just after 10 p.m. when the night shift had begun, and in room 42, around 150 to 170 women and girls were working, fitting fuses into shells by hand, tightening them and sending them along for completion. And then, at 10:27 p.m, a violent explosion tore through the room. 35 women were killed instantly, Elsie, she was one of those. Many others were injured, and in some cases the only way to identify those who had died was by the identity discs they wore around their necks. And even then people rushed in to help. Workers went back into the wreckage, pulling the injured to safety despite the risk of further explosions. And incredibly, within hours, some were already volunteering to return to work. Production was only stopped briefly because the war carried on. And for a very long time, the truth of what happened here wasn't fully told. Reports were censored, and the only sign of the tragedy was in a small notice in the newspaper, "Killed by accident." And now Elsie lies here.
This is somebody else that I really wanted to find when I was here in Leeds, and it's Edward Caldwell Spruce. Now, as the gravestone, I'll just read it to you. It says, renowned sculptor, teacher, chief modeller, Bermontoff's Pottery, and also his daughter Phyllis, 1888, aged 5 months, and William Butterfield, 1920. So he was 1865 to 1922, and his work is absolutely incredible. He designed some of the panels that were on the Midland Hotel in Manchester. If you were around on the channel for that video, we visited that. That's another place full of stories, but I'll try and find some clips of the panels, see if I can put them in so you can see some of his work. But you will, if you don't want to watch that, you will see some of his work shortly anyway, because the next cemetery that we are going to, he designed one of the graves there that is absolutely exquisite. So I'll take you there next, but it's important to obviously pay our respects to him here as well. Yeah, a very important man.
This headstone is actually a relatively new one. It was unveiled in 2022 by the Friends of Beckett Street Cemetery, 100 years after Edward Caldwell Spruce's funeral. And it's a reminder that some stories can still be brought back, even after all that time. Spruce was an English sculptor and artist born in 1865 and a student at Leeds College of Art. He started out working locally before moving to the Bermontoff's Pottery here in Leeds, where he became principal modeller. And his work didn't just stay here in the city. As I've just mentioned, if you've been to Manchester, you might have seen some of it without even realising. Because the terracotta panels here on the Midland Hotel, they depict literature, sculpture, architecture and art, and they were designed by Spruce. They were made back here in Leeds at the Bermontoff's Works, and now they are on the Midland Hotel. I think that's such a fascinating connection, and something that's always going to hopefully be there for us to see and appreciate and remember him. But perhaps his most significant work is one we're going to come across later, a large memorial at Lawnswood Cemetery created in 1918 for the Leeds businessman Sam Wilson. So although his name might not be widely known as much today, his work still stands.
It's time to leave the Beckett Street Cemetery behind us now and get on to our next stop, which is where not only will we see a grave that was designed by Spruce, who we showed you earlier, but also a really famous grave up here in Yorkshire, one that visitors flocked from miles when it first was put up, shall we say. So that's going to be interesting. That's where we're heading next. Now, if you do come and visit Beckett Street Cemetery, it's worth noting that if you're here for the day, there's obviously the Thackeray Medical Museum across the road. So that might be a point of interest if you're coming to visit. Okay, let's get on with our next stop. We are now at our third and final cemetery for this video. Now, this is the cemetery that some of you recommended that I came and visited while I was in Leeds, because this one is quite important. Some people call it the Highgate of the North. We will see. Now, there's various graves that we want to come and visit while we're here. One of those is a name of George Corson. He was actually the architect who landscaped this cemetery. Now, it was built in, it was opened in 1875, again due to the burial crisis that they were having in the city. And there's lots and lots of graves here. It's a really big site. You might spot behind me is one of the graves in particular that we're going to be visiting next, and that is of course the grave of Ethel, which is known as Ethel at the Gate. There is a bit of a rumour that this is a bit of a paranormal hotspot, but I'm not going to get into ghost stories on this one. I'm just going to tell you the story of why this grave became so famous in particular, and then we're going to look at some of the other graves that I promised you from earlier on in the video.
Lawnswood Cemetery, located on Otley Road, about 4 miles northwest of Leeds city centre. Now this began as a much smaller site, possibly around 10 acres. Today it's grown closer to maybe 50. Now recognised as a garden of special historical interest, it holds hundreds of stories, including over 300 Commonwealth war dead from both World Wars. The cemetery is also home to a number of Grade 2 listed monuments, including several particularly ornate and historically significant graves. Now, we will be visiting all of those listed monument graves today in this episode. And unlike the cemeteries we've seen before, this is still very much an active place, continuing to serve the city today.
We've literally just arrived and already we are being met with some absolutely exquisite graves. I mean, just this one behind me, the detail that's gone into that, the love, the thought about it. I mean, it's just incredible. But we're here for Ethel as well. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Ethel at the Gate. This grave was built by her husband when she died. I think she was in her 50s. He was absolutely devastated. And he had this amazing monument built for her. It's a statue said to resemble her. And behind her is the door of their home that they were said to have lived in. So he left the gate, the door, slightly ajar, ready for when he died, he could be reunited with Ethel. And people came from all over the country to see this grave. I mean, there's pictures online of people queuing up and they were buying postcards of it. The Leeds City Council had to put on extra trams for this. There was extra police officers enforced. And yeah, it was a bit of a tourist attraction. So this is it. Now, there is a little bit of a sign up as well. So I'll read that. It says, Ethel Preston Memorial, Grade 2 listed monument. Ethel West, 1861 to 1911, married Walter Preston, a manufacturing chemist, in 1882. They lived at the Grange, Beeston, which has now been demolished. There were no children. Ethel died aged 50 in 1911. In 1912, this is where it gets a little bit controversial, just a year after Ethel's death, Walter married his 22-year-old housekeeper, Emily Florence Richardson. So some question, was he as devastated as he made out? Anyway, he died in 1930, and Emily, who later remarried, had him buried alongside Ethel, thus reuniting the couple in death. Ethel's weight was not in vain. Now the door is still slightly ajar. Inscription, so let's have a look at it. Oh, sorry, I should have said to you as well. Oh, there's pictures here of the when the crowds were coming to come and see her. Ethel's elaborate memorial, sculptor unknown, was erected by Walter in 1913, said to be made from Italian marble, and is a replica of the entrance to their home. A life-size statue of Ethel shows her standing in the porch, the door behind her slightly ajar, awaiting the return of her husband. It became an instant attraction. The public flocked to see it, and it was reported that several thousand visited over a 4-week period. Extra tram. It's basically telling you what I've already just told you. I've never seen this in person myself, and I must say it is quite exquisite. He must have really, really loved her at the time to make such a beautiful memorial. But obviously people question that when he went on and married his 22-year-old housekeeper. However, maybe he just needed some company, I don't know. I'm not judging that. So obviously behind the door, the inscription reads, "To the dear memory of Ethel, wife of Walter Preston, the Grange Beeston. Died March the 24th, 1911, aged 50 years. And then Walter's inscriptions on the other side as well. Very close to Ethel, if not almost next door, you've got this monument or grave to Arthur Briggs. Now, he was the mayor of Leeds at one point, and he was famous for the fact that he was the first person to bring out a profit sharing scheme for his employees. He was a mine owner, and that was very, very rare, but it obviously meant he really appreciated the people that worked for him, which again is very, very rare. So yeah, this is an absolutely beautiful piece. I believe it's grade 2 listed as well. One of the other interesting things about this cemetery is that it had the first crematorium in the whole of Leeds, but it had the first gas-used crematorium in Britain. So that's another part of history. Bit of a morbid part of history, but it's a part of history nevertheless.
Lawnswood Crematorium opened in 1905 and was the first in Britain to use a gas cremator, replacing the earlier coal and wood-fired methods, which were far less efficient and often controversial. This new system was more controlled, more reliable, and marked a real shift in how cremation would be carried out across the country.
Now, tucked away in the corner, we've got the Otley Road just behind me and this bush in between, is the grave of George Corson. Now, he was the architect of Lawnswood. He's the guy that landscaped it, shall we say. And from what I read, he really wanted it in that true Victorian style. He wanted it to be a garden of peace, tree-lined avenues and such. And to be fair, George, you've done an amazing job. So this is his grave where he is buried now. He also landscaped Roundhay Park in Leeds as well, I believe. So it says, in loving memory of George Corson, architect, son of James Corson of Berrehome, Dumfries, November the 18th, 1910, aged 80. God is love. And it looks like his wife is also buried here too. So we've got Harriet Mary Gough Corson. His wife died May the 4th, 1928, aged 77 years, at rest. Remembering what we said at the beginning about a lot of these cemeteries being connected to each other and how the very people of Leeds were all in one way interlinked in one way or another. Now, we've just been to Beckett Street and we've seen the grave of Edward Caldwell Spruce, the sculptor. He is the guy that designed this, created this. Now, this is one of the graves that I really wanted to see in Lawnswood, and this is one that lots of people come to visit. It's the grave of Sam Wilson. He was a businessman, but he was also an avid collector of the arts. So he loved paintings and furniture and all sorts of things like that. Now, when he died, his wife Anne donated his extensive collection to the Leeds Art Gallery, along with I think a sum of about £1,000 to house it as well. So I think they named a gallery after him in the art gallery. I'm not too sure about that, but yeah, I think they did. But this is the elaborate memorial that was created, and it's absolutely beautiful. And in a way, I think it pays tribute to Sam Wilson, obviously, but also to Edward Caldwell Spruce as well, because this should be in an art gallery on its own.
This grave is one of the most striking in the entire cemetery, and every detail here feels deliberate. Made from polished black marble and adorned with bronze figures, it represents more than just a burial. It's a reflection of status, belief, and legacy. The three figures you can see, faith, hope, and benevolence, aren't just decorative. They symbolise the ideals that defined both the era he lived in and how figures like Sam Wilson wanted to be remembered. Faith representing religious devotion, hope, the promise of something beyond death, and benevolence, a nod to charity, generosity and public duty. Rising above it, a tall angel holding the torch, that symbol of hope, of light continuing even beyond death. At the centre, an inscription reads Mors Janua Vitae, Latin. It means death, the gate to life. It's a powerful message and one that ties everything here together, because beneath it all, there's a quiet reminder. A skull, subtle but unmistakable, a classic symbol of mortality, that no matter the wealth, the influence or the monument built above you, death comes for everyone. Because in the end, this isn't just about death, it's about memory, about how a life is seen long after it's over.
So Leeds is obviously built on the lives of so many that have come before us, and it's been an absolute pleasure to walk through some of the cemeteries and learn some of the stories of the people. Obviously I can't fit everybody in, and I wish I could, because every little impression that everybody's made in this city has been a bigger picture, hasn't it? And if you've got anybody buried in any of these cemeteries that you'd like to remember today, feel free to drop their names in the comments. So thank you for joining me. If there's any other cemeteries or cities or towns in England that you think is worth me visiting to share some of the stories and reflect that, then please also let me know in the comments. So until next week, stay safe, stay curious and take good care of yourselves.